Welcome to Ontario Cold Cases, Canada's true crime podcast. This is Murder in the Island Ferry, a Mick and Mack mystery. Act 1, Sinking Feelings. Chapter 1, Choppy Waters. The ferry Trillium Bell cut a lazy path through Lake Ontario, its wake feathering across the still blue water like lace on a dowager's sleeve. A handful of passengers lounged on the upper deck, newspaper pages flapping in the breeze, collars turned up against the lake chill. Seagulls hovered overhead, opportunistic and noisy, while the Toronto skyline shrank behind them into mist. Detective McCathie stood at the rail, steady as a lamppost, hands tucked in the pockets of his brown overcoat, his fedora pulled low against the breeze. He looked like he could have been born on a dock, brow furrowed, eyes squinting into the middle distance, thinking about something no one else could see. His partner, MacNeely, looked like he might be sick into the water. "Oh boy," Mack groaned, gripping the metal railing like it might abandon him at any moment. "Did the lake always move like this, or is it just me?" "You're leaning too far forward," Mick said without turning. "Try looking at the horizon. Or close your eyes and pretend you're on a park bench." "Park bench doesn't jiggle like a bad idea," Mack muttered. "I shouldn't have had those sausages. Or the eggs. Or the toast. Or that second coffee." "He had 3 coffees," Mick pointed out. "I was being optimistic." Mack closed his eyes, face greenish. "Next time, I'm swimming." The ferry horn gave a cheerful whomp, and the dock at Ward's Island grew closer, its wooden planks stacked like the teeth of a waiting mouth. A few passengers began gathering their things. Children chased each other between deck chairs, their mothers too tired to care. A woman with a green scarf and high heels fished a compact mirror from her purse and touched up her lipstick. "Remind me again why we're doing this?" Mack asked, peeling himself off the rail. "Community safety meeting," Mick replied. "Ward's Residence Committee requests a liaison from the department. Chief Stewart thought we'd be less objectionable than the usual beat officers." Mack blinked. "That's a compliment we're going with today?" Before Mick could answer, a sharp cry broke the calm. "Excuse me, has anyone seen this bag's owner?" A ferry deckhand called out, holding up a sleek tan handbag. "We found it under one of the benches by the stairs." Passengers glanced around. The woman with the green scarf was gone. A child pointed at the empty bench. A man in a gray raincoat frowned. Murmurs rippled across the deck like wind across the water. Mick moved quickly. "When was it found?" "Just a minute ago," said the deckhand. "Nobody saw her leave. We're still at the dock." Mick opened the bag carefully. Inside were a lipstick, compact, a leather wallet containing identification for Jeanette Everly, and a ferry ticket stub. Nothing appeared stolen. Something felt wrong. Mack leaned over his shoulder. A lighter but no cigarettes, no keys. Ladies don't usually abandon their purses, do they? "No," Mick said, "they don't." They both turned slowly toward the lake. The sun glittered innocently on the surface. The breeze carried something darker now. A whisper of worry. Silence that didn't belong. The ferry crew began searching in earnest, but no one remembered her getting off. She hadn't made it to the island, and she wasn't on the boat. Chapter 2, 1 passenger less. The phone rang at exactly 4:17 p.m. Mick had just settled in a creaky chair at the Ward's Island Community Hall, trying to make sense of a corkboard layer with notices for poetry readings, lost cats, and something called mud yoga. Mack was on his second cup of overly herbal tea and poking suspiciously at a tray of rhubarb squares. The constable at the door picked up the call. His expression shifted from idle to grim in under 5 seconds. He hung up. They found her. Mick and Mack were on the next police launch to Snake Island. Jeanette Everly's body had washed up against a muddy bank, tangled in lakeweed. 2 park wardens had spotted her around a bend where the water ran slow and quiet. Dr. Kendall, city coroner, was already there. He stood ankle deep in reeds, sleeves rolled back, his coat in a nearby stump. His thermos sat beside it untouched. That alone told Mick the news wasn't good. "Afternoon, gentlemen," Kendall said. His voice was calm as always. There was a hint of flint behind the words. "Looks like our ferry friend didn't make it ashore." Mick crouched beside the body, careful not to disturb the scene. Jeanette's eyes were closed. Her lipstick was still faintly visible, a perfect rosebud mouth and a face that looked oddly serene. "Drowning?" Mick asked. "Technically, yes," Kendall replied, "but not an accident." Pointing with a pencil to a dark bruise in her upper arm. "This here. Pressure trauma, like someone grabbed her, hard." "And this," he said, gently lifting her hair to reveal the back of her head, "is a contusion. Blunt force. Not bad enough to kill her, but enough to stun her." Mack frowned. "So she didn't fall in?" "No, she was helped." Dr. Kendall pulled a small notebook from his coat pocket. "Time of death consistent with the ferry ride. Water temperature slows decomposition, but I'd say she went in sometime between noon and 1. "She never made it off the boat," Mick said. "Or she did," Mack added. "Someone made sure she didn't enjoy the view." Back on Ward's Island, Mick and Mack walked the shoreline where the ferry docked. The breeze had picked up, and with it, the chatter of worried voices. News had spread fast. Islanders don't need newspapers. They have porches. "She was alone," Mack said, flipping through his notes. "No one saw her leave with anyone. No one reported hearing a splash, a scream, nothing." "She was quiet, according to the ferry manifest," Mick replied. "Lived on the island, came and went in a regular schedule." Mack squinted toward the narrow strip of beach. "So who wanted her off that schedule?" A gull shrieked overhead. Mick's eyes narrowed. "Let's find out." Chapter 3. A Tight-Knit Island. Sign tacked to the community bulletin board read, "Welcome to Ward's Island. Don't forget to say hello." Beneath it, someone had scrawled in pencil, "But don't stay long." Mick and Mack stepped off the gravel path and into the heart of the island. If you could call a few clapboard houses, a general store, and a tea house a heart. Chickens clucked in someone's yard. Guitars strummed somewhere nearby. Laundry flapped like surrender flags in the breeze. Mack rubbed his stomach. Don't trust any town where the only restaurant has a "maybe open" sign. "Think they've got sandwiches?" "They've got questions," Mick said. "Let's start with the dock." The dockmaster, Harvey Pitt, was built like a tugboat and twice as grumpy. He wore a battered fisherman's cap, a mustard-colored sweater that looked older than Confederation, and an expression that could sand wood. "You boys were with the police," he said, peering at their badges like they were forged. "We're detectives," Mack said, trying to sound pleasant. "Just trying to figure out what happened to Miss Everly." "Yeah, well, she wasn't much for talking," Harvey growled. "Kept to herself. Lived in one of them little houses off Willow Lane. Always had a notebook. Always looked like she was about to tell you to shush." "Was she upset lately?" Mick asked. "Nervous?" Harvey shrugged. "She didn't like that Sharp fellow sniffing round, but none of us do." "Why's that?" Mick asked. "Because this island's not for sale." They found Sister Eloise arranging flowers in front of the tiny lending library, a one-room cottage filled with books, tea tins, and the scent of lavender and old secrets. She wore a faded wimple under a sun hat and smiled at them like they were errant schoolboys caught climbing trees. "Such a terrible thing, poor Jeanette," she sighed. Though in truth, she always did seem like a woman waiting for something to happen. Or someone. "Did she have any enemies?" Mick asked. "Dear, if I told you all the people who didn't like Jeanette Everly, we'd be here till vespers." "She seemed quiet," Mack said. "Quiet and opinionated," Sister Eloise said. "A dangerous mix, especially when she started poking her nose into council matters and property transfers. And she wasn't wrong about the islands changing." "Was she close to anyone?" Mick asked. The nun hesitated. "She and Myrna Gold were once very close. Artistic types, kindred spirits, you might say, but something cooled. Do you know what? Mack asked. No, she smiled faintly, but I could hazard a guess. Myrna Gold was painting in her front garden, shirt sleeves sunburned and surrounded by half-finished canvases and judgment. She barely looked up as they approached. If you're here to arrest me, she said, wait until I finish this shadow. We're not, Mick said calmly, just asking questions. You and everyone else, she muttered. Let me guess. Was Jeanette upset? Did she have enemies? She had opinions, that's enough. You two were friends, Mack asked. Myrna scoffed. We were allies, till she decided she was the only one who got to define what saving the island looked like. Think someone killed her over that? Mick asked. She looked up, eyes sharp. Think people kill over money, and Jeanette was standing in its way. You met Douglas Sharp by the community dock, tanned and toothy in a linen jacket that looked like it belonged in Miami, not Lake Ontario. Gentlemen, he greeted them. Terrible business, that. Terrible. I was just telling a client last week how peaceful the islands are. How secure. It's going to hurt tourism. You were trying to buy Jeanette's house, Mick asked. Sharp gave a modest shrug. I made her an offer, yes. She wasn't interested. Very strong-willed woman, passionate. Too bad she never saw the potential here. Coffee shops, boutique cabins, maybe even a jazz pavilion. I tell you, the island could be a new Riviera. Just without the consent of the people living here, Mack asked. Sharp chuckled. Progress detective rarely asked for permission. As they walked back toward the station launch, Mack stopped to tie his shoe and looked longingly at the sandwich board advertising chickpea turnovers on boiled nettle stew. A place like this, he muttered, makes a man appreciate the smell of hot dogs and bad coffee. Mick didn't answer. He was thinking about alibis, and how everyone they just met had one. Too neat, too polished, too prepared. Act 2. Storms Below the Surface. Chapter 4. Ghosts in the Boathouse. Jeanette Everly's cottage sat at the edge of the island like it had something to hide. A squat weathered structure, peeling shutters and a red tin roof. It leaned slightly westward, so bracing itself against a march of time in the city skyline just across the water. Wind rattled the loose porch boards, and a crow watched them from the roof with the same suspicion Mick wore under his fedora. I'll say this, Mack muttered, pushing open the creaking gate. The place had atmosphere. Inside, it smelled of cedar, linseed oil. Someone preferred books to visitors. The furniture was simple and sparse. A desk under the front window bore stacks of papers and a half-used ink blotter. A kettle sat in the stove, still half full of stale water. The cottage felt paused, not abandoned. Mick moved with practiced eyes. He studied corners, checked baseboards, opened drawers slowly. Mack, less subtle, poked around with the tip of a pencil and occasionally made skeptical noises. He's a pin, Mack said. No sign of a struggle. No sign of anyone staying overnight recently either, Mick added. She may have kept the second residence, possibly in town. Or she knew someone might come snooping and clean house, Mack offered. Mick stepped toward the back of the cottage. A narrow hall led to a small bedroom and a low door. The latch stuck. He forced it open and descended 2 steps into a boat shed built onto the rear of the house, half storage, half ghost story. The lake lapped quietly beneath the slatted floorboards. A battered canoe hung in the wall like a sleeping bat. Shelves held old life vests, rusted oars, and a dusty tin box marked insurance papers in Jeanette's tidy script. Mick opened it. Inside, nothing but a few expired ferry passes. But behind the box, wedged into a narrow gap between the wall and shelf, he spotted something else. A large envelope, water-stained and thick. He pulled it free. Inside, land transfer documents. Unfiled, unsigned. The name Douglas Sharp appeared 6 times. Property maps were included, some hand-annotated with circled lots, including Jeanette's own. A small stack of typed notes had been paper-clipped together, outlines for a community protest, letters to the city, and a draft of a speech Jeanette had apparently intended to give at the next island council meeting. The title read, "The Spirit of the Island, Why We Must Resist." Mick laid the materials out on the table back in the main room. Mack whistled low. She wasn't just saying no, he said. She was organizing. Sharp wasn't trying to buy her out, Mick replied. He was trying to shut her up. Mack leaned over the documents. Some of these names are familiar. Harvey, Eloise, Myrna. She was trying to get them all to speak up. Someone got to her first, Mick said, tapping the envelope. The question is, was it for money or something else? A gust of wind blew against the window, rattling the latch. The lake slapped against the dock below, patient and endless. And the ghost of the island whispered just a little louder. Chapter 5. Mack Makes Waves. The dock creaked beneath their feet as Mick and Mack approached Harvey Pitt's boathouse for a second round of questioning. The sun was just beginning to dip behind the skyline, bathing the lake in a copper shimmer. A breeze carried the smell of algae and engine oil, with just a hint of fish stew wafting from someone's back porch. Harvey stood near the edge, tossing breadcrumbs to a pair of gulls like he was trying to buy their silence. Back again, he grunted as they approached. You boys plan to interrogate me every time the tide changes? Just tying up loose ends, Mick replied. You say you didn't speak much to Jeanette. Didn't like her politics, that's fine. But did you ever see her meeting with anyone down here, off the books? Harvey's eyes narrowed. Don't keep track of every whisper in this island. But you do keep track of who comes and goes on the dock, Mick said. She didn't meet anyone here, Harvey said quickly. Not that I saw. Mick tilted his head. Funny thing, though. That scarf she always wore, the green one, wasn't found with the body or the handbag. Harvey bristled. Do you think I'm hoarding scarves now? Mack, bored and restless, had begun pacing the edge of the dock. He bent down to peer into the water. Maybe she lost in the lake, he muttered. Maybe she dropped her right about. He leaned a little too far forward. Sploosh. Harvey jumped back. Mick didn't even blink. Bobbing in the water like a disgruntled sea lion, Mack spat out a mouthful of lake and flailed toward the dock. I'm fine, he said indignantly. Just conducting some very immersive field work. You look like a wet sandwich, Harvey snorted. Mack kicked toward the side ladder, but then stopped, treading water. Hang on, what's this? His hand dipped below the surface. Came up with something clutched in his fist. Long, sodden, and unmistakably green silk. Mick crouched as Mack climbed the ladder. That what I think it is? Unless you know another woman on this island who accessorized like a poison ivy ad. Mick carefully took the scarf. It was torn at one end, the fabric snagged and frayed. Faint scent of rosewater clung to it, half drowned, but stubborn. He turned to Harvey. Still think no one met her on the dock? Harvey's eyes darted to the scarf, then to the lake. I told you, he muttered. I didn't see anything. Maybe you didn't want to, Mick said. Or maybe you saw more than you meant to. Mack, dripping wet and peeling seaweed off his coat sleeve, coughed. You boys can finish up without me. I'm going to find a towel, then interrogate a grilled cheese sandwich. Chapter 6. Artists, Lovers, and Liars. Myrna Gold's cottage looked like it had been painted by a madwoman, or at least someone with a lot of leftover brushes and very little patience for rules. Bright colors clashed on the walls, abstract shapes danced across shutters, and ceramic wind chimes clattered like drunken bones in the breeze. She was in the garden again, barefoot and ferociously sanding a wooden chair that hadn't asked for trouble. Her eyes flicked up as Mick approached. Back already, she said. Let me guess. Found some knitting needles, and now I'm the prime suspect. Not quite, Mick said, hands in his coat pockets. Though we did find Jeanette's scarf. In the lake, near the dock. Myrna's hands stilled. So she didn't drown by accident, then? No, Mick said quietly, she didn't. Myrna sat down in the half-sanded chair with a sigh. I suppose you want to ask me about us. I already did, Mick said. You said you were allies. I lied, she said simply. Inside, she poured Mick a mug of bitter dandelion tea and talked while staring into the middle distance, as if the story wasn't entirely hers to tell. Jeanette and I were close, she began. Not just friends. Closer than that, though neither of us ever had the courage or clarity to say what it was. Lovers? Mick asked gently. Once. Or almost. It's hard to say when the line blurs. She gave a sharp, tired smile. We both care more about ideas than people, and eventually that caught up with us. She was organizing the island, Mick said, pushing back against Sharp, writing letters, making speeches. She was planning a manifesto, Myrna said. She wanted to preserve the island as it was, free, odd, stubborn. She hated the thought of it becoming a resort or commuter suburb. She thought someone was trying to force her out. Myrna nodded. She told me someone had been in her cottage, said papers went missing. Started double-bolting her door, got nervous around strangers, started accusing people. Accusing you? Mick asked. She said I'd sold out, and I was considering taking Sharp's offer to fund my art collective. Myrna's jaw tightened. We argued. Told her she was being paranoid. She told me I betrayed everything we believed in. Did you? No, Myrna said, but I thought about it. Later that afternoon, Mick stopped by the lending library. Her sister Eloise was sorting return books with ecclesiastical precision and a pair of white cotton gloves. Spoke with Myrna, he said. The nun didn't look up. And did she admit to being angry with Jeanette? Yes. Good, Eloise said. She was. Mick raised an eyebrow. You're not shocked? She gave a thin smile. I've lived long enough to know that most friendships end in silence, and some end in screams. Mick leaned on the checkout desk. Jeanette believed someone was after her, but she had something worth hiding. She did, Eloise said, sliding a book into place. She kept a diary, wrote in it daily, long before she began her crusade. You know where it is? No, Eloise said, finally meeting his eyes. But I know someone took it. Who? I don't know, she said, but it vanished the day after she did. Mick straightened. And you didn't mention this earlier? Eloise gave him a patient look. Detective? I'm a retired nun. I don't confess to you. Act 3, A Dark Current. Chapter 7, What the Diary Said. The Ward's Island Lending Library was quiet at dusk, the last rays of sunlight filtering through its lace curtains and dust-speckled air. The kind of place where secrets didn't whisper. They waited. Mick stood alone between the shelves, running his fingers along the spines of old books. If you were hiding a diary, he murmured to himself, you wouldn't choose something obvious. Mack entered behind him, wiping the last of the lake from his shoes with a borrowed towel. I asked Sister Eloise about a diary. She said she didn't know where it was. But when I said we were headed back to town, she told me to double-check the fiction section. Right after laughing at my haircut. Mack didn't smile. He was too focused on the weather copy of The Mill and the Floss, heavy for its size. He opened it. Inside, nestled in a hollowed-out cavity cut clean through the pages, was a dark red leather diary, bound with a simple ribbon. Its edges were thumb-worn, the ribbon frayed. It smelled of lake damp and lavender oil. Back of the island constable's office, a converted ferry shed with a potbelly stove and a half-functional ceiling fan. They laid the diary on the table and began reading. Jeanette's entries were precise and intelligent, written in tight cursive. March 4. Another offer today. Sharp sent one of his salesmen, slick and smiling and carrying biscotti like a peace offering. Told him to stuff it in a storm drain. He laughed. I didn't. March 15. The map on my wall was moved. Slightly. Enough to notice. Nothing missing, but I don't like the feeling. April 1st. Found one of the protest letters in my desk, torn in half. Didn't tear it. No one else has a key. April 10. Sharp is working with someone local. I'm sure of it. Councilman Rains has been pushing zoning reform in committee meetings, and I suspect he's forging signatures. At least 2 properties transferred without public record. I've copied the documents, hidden them in the usual place. April 12. I confronted Myrna. Thought she'd deny it, but she looked almost ashamed. She didn't admit anything, but she didn't deny it either. April 13. I think I pushed too far. I heard something outside the cottage last night. Second time this week. Going to give the diary to Eloise tomorrow. She'll know what to do. If something happens to me, someone needs to read this. There were no entries after that. Mack exhaled slowly. So she knew. Not just about Sharp, but about Rains. Forged signatures, bribes. It's more than land speculation, that's criminal conspiracy. And someone didn't want it getting out, Mick said. He turned to the window, watching the waves slap quietly at the dock outside. She didn't fall. She was silenced. Mack flipped back to the April 10 entry. She says she had copied documents in the usual place. Not the cottage, Mick said. She knew it wasn't safe. Mack's eyes lit up. Think she stashed them at Eloise's? No, Mick said slowly, thinking Jeanette's old canoe. Think she stashed them somewhere. No one would look for secrets, because they'd be too busy looking for paddles. Chapter 8. The Ferry Schedule. The next morning the detectives stood in the mainland ferry terminal. A low-slung building that looked like it had once tried to be a cafe but gave up somewhere around the war. It smelled faintly of diesel, wet rope, and old boot polish. A bulletin board displayed ferry schedules, some faded notices, and a curling photo of the crew above the motto. Rain or shine, the Trillium Bell runs on time. They'd spoken to Councillor Edwin Rains the day before, hoping for a routine background. His name had come up in the island's zoning committee meetings, and Jeanette had made no secret of opposing his development vision. But when asked if he'd spoken to her recently, or been on the island at all, Rains had waved it off with a smooth smile. Haven't stepped foot in that little patch of mud in months, he said, though I do admire the rustic charm. Now with the ferry logs just a counter away, that claim looked a lot more like a lie. At the dispatch desk, Clive, a thin man with a permanently startled expression, was organizing ticket stubs and sipping something suspicious from a chipped thermos. We're looking for the passenger manifest from Tuesday morning, Mick said, setting his badge on the counter, particularly the 11:15 a.m. to Ward's Island. Clive squinted, pushed up his glasses, and slid a large ledger toward them. Bit of a crowd that day, he said. Weather was good. We had tradespeople, a school group, a handful of regulars. Here it is, 11:15 Tuesday, the bell. His fingers skimmed the list and stopped. Passenger, E. Rains. First name, Mick asked. Clive checked the manifest again, flipping the corner for a closer look. Yep, Edwin Rains. Written clear as day. Mack let out a low whistle. That's not what the councillor said yesterday? No, Mick said, it's not. Clive scratched his head. He'd sure made a fuss about his ticket. Say he wanted to be marked down for official correspondence. Whatever that means. Dressed like a senator, smelled like a cigar box. Did you see who you talked to on the ride over? Mick asked. Clive shook his head. Too busy loading a crate of pickled herring someone ordered by mistake. Try the upper deck steward, or Cordelia Blunt. She sees everything, whether she wants to or not. They found Miss Cordelia Blunt in the tea house, where she was halfway through a pot of Darjeeling and a scandalous-looking scone. She wore an orange shawl with tassels and the air of a woman who had outlived 3 husbands, and suspected she outlived everyone else by sheer force of opinion. Oh, yes, she said brightly when they asked. Councillor Rains and Miss Everly were on the upper deck Tuesday morning. She had that little red folder she always carried, and he had the gall to take off his hat before he yelled at her. Mick leaned forward. He yelled. Not quite yelled, Cordelia said, buttering her second scone. But it had edge. I didn't hear everything, but I distinctly caught the word libel. Something about interfering with council process. She didn't look impressed. Did you see them disembark? No, I went below when the ferry hit the chop. My stomach has strong opinions about lake spray. Anyone else around? Mack asked. Maybe, she said vaguely. But I was focused on not losing my breakfast. I suggest you check with the steward. Later that afternoon, in Councillor Edwin Rains's oak-panelled office, the mood had shifted from polite to prickly. I already told the constables, Rains said, adjusting his tie with a jerk. I wasn't on the island this week. Passenger list says otherwise, Mick replied. Signed the manifest copy across the desk. Booked on the 11:15 to Ward's Island, and identified by multiple witnesses. Rains paused, his jaw tightened. I may have taken the ferry, he admitted slowly, briefly, on personal business. He was found dead that day, Mack said. That doesn't ring your conscience? It had nothing to do with Miss Everly's death, Rains snapped. She was an agitator, a troublesome woman with unrealistic ideas about property rights. Funny, Mick said. Her diary describes you as pushing zoning reform and forging signatures. Rains froze. That's nonsense. She had proof, Mick continued. Copies. Notes. Hidden documents. And if those ever surface, Rains said, standing, you'll be hearing from my solicitor. Mack smiled. Sure to tell him how you forgot you were on a boat. Back on the dock, the lake was calm, but the air around it wasn't. She cornered him on the ferry, Mick said, staring across the water. Tried to make him confess, maybe even threaten to go public. She underestimated how far he'd go to keep it quiet, Mack said grimly. Mick nodded, or who he'd go to for help. Chapter 9. The Drowning Reenactment. The Trillium Bell bobbed at its slip under a hazy spring sky, seagulls circling lazily above like spectators waiting for the next act. Mick stood in the upper deck beside Myrna Gold, being roped into his latest experiment with a mixture of curiosity and suspicion. You're telling me, she said, squinting at the lake, that you want me to help throw a fake body overboard? I prefer scientific reenactment, Mick replied, tapping the notebook under his arm. We're trying to confirm what's possible and what isn't. Sure. And next we'll hold a seance and ask Jeanette to weigh in herself. Mack grunted from the lower deck, where he was dragging a mannequin borrowed from the constable's office, dressed in cast-off clothes and weighted with 2 bricks in a canvas bag. Let the record show, Mack muttered, that I voted for just asking Harvey again until he snapped. We did ask him, Mick reminded, and he lied, or at least misled. And this is faster than waiting for a guilty conscience. They began the top deck, where Cordelia Blunt had last seen Jeanette arguing with Rains. Mick timed the wind, the current, and the angle of descent. The mannequin dropped from the railing with a soft splash and disappeared beneath the surface. They waited and waited. Eventually, Mack reeled in the rope tied to the ankle. The mannequin had barely drifted 10 feet, pulled slowly toward the outer harbor. Even with current, Mick said, she wouldn't have ended up near Snake Island. Not from here. She was found close to shore, Mack added, and no major injuries. If someone pushed her here, the angle's all wrong, she'd have struck the hull. Myrna crossed her arms. So she didn't fall from the top. No, Mick said, she didn't fall at all. Next, they tested the engine bay level, a narrow, semi-private section near the stern where crew could access tools and tie off lines. The public wasn't allowed back there. The door was often kept locked. But Harvey Pitt, as dockmaster, had keys and motive. He's the one who said she never got off the ferry, Mick said quietly. But oh, if she never had the chance. Myrna hesitated and nodded toward the water. See what she says. They dropped the mannequin again, this time from the lower stern gate. The splash was softer, the drift quicker. Within 20 minutes, the current carried it toward the inlet near Snake Island. Mack stared. Well, I'll be. She was killed here, Mick said. Stunned or strangled, maybe both, then dumped. No witnesses, no screams, no struggle. Just a short fall into cold water. Myrna's voice was quiet, and Harvey Pitt would have known exactly how to time the tides. Mick nodded, where to throw something if he wanted it found, eventually. Later that afternoon, Mick knocked on the side of the boathouse where Harvey was scraping barnacles from a skiff. Mind we chat? Mick asked. Harvey didn't look up. Thought we already did that. You left something out, Mick said, like how you had access to the engine bay, and why your name's on zoning meeting minutes with Rains and Sharp, 3 weeks before Jeanette was found dead. Harvey wiped his hands on the rag. I got no love for Sharp or Rains. You got a boat, Mack said, stepping up behind him. The key to the ferry's lower level. And you knew Jeanette was stirring things up. Harvey looked at them both. For a moment he said nothing, then he grunted. I didn't kill her. No, Mick said, but we think you helped someone covered up. Act 4. The Tide Turns. Chapter 10. Caught Between Shores. The sun hung low behind the trees, casting long gold shadows across the Ward's Island dock. The lake was calm, glossy, but the tension in the air said otherwise. MacNeely had gone for what he claimed was a sandwich-seeking mission, but ended up wandering back toward the boathouse out of habit. The place had the smell of damp rope, old fuel, and secrets that had soaked in through the floorboards. He was about to call out for Harvey when he heard voices inside, low, clipped, angry. He stopped at the side door just out of sight. You told me you'd handle it, came the unmistakable voice of Edwin Rains, his usual pomp clipped to a frantic whisper. You said she'd back off. I told you I'd talk to her, Harvey Pitt growled. I never said I'd push her into the lake. Don't be dramatic. You took the money. I took it for repairs, for this dump of a ferry system that no one wants to fund. And yeah, I was scared. You and Sharp, you play with people's lives like poker chips. She was going to go public, Rain snapped. She had files, letters, those damn maps. She was naming names, our names. Harvey's voice was lower now, slower. That wasn't the plan. You told me you talked her down. The next thing you know, she's floating near Snake Island. There was a beat of silence. Do you want to go down for it, Rains hissed? You think the cops won't look your way first? You were the last person who saw her. I didn't kill her, Harvey muttered, but maybe I didn't stop it either. Mack eased away from the door and slipped down the path like a shadow with a stomachache. As soon as he was clear, he broke into a jog, muttering under his breath. I come for a sandwich and walk into a confession. Back at the small constable's shack, Mick was cleaning mud from his shoe with a pencil when Mack burst in. Tell me you found something, Mick said. Oh, I found everything, Mack said, panting. Our pal Harvey? He didn't just know about the murder. He was this close to being the boatman on the River Styx. Mick straightened. He confessed? Not exactly, but he and Raines just had a lover's quarrel about the whole affair. Harvey took hush money. Raines was panicking. Jeanette was going to blow the lid off their whole operation. When Harvey wouldn't help her scare her, Raines pushed her over the edge, literally. Mick grabbed his coat. Let's go reel them in. They arrived back at the boathouse to find Harvey sitting alone in an upturned bucket, staring out at the lake like it owed him an apology. You heard all that, he said, not even looking up as they approached. We did, Mick said. I didn't lay a hand on her, Harvey muttered. I didn't stop him either. That makes me something, doesn't it? An accessory, Mick said, but also a witness. And you're going to help us get Raines. Harvey didn't speak for a long time. Then he nodded. I'll testify, but I want something clear. What's that? Mack asked. Harvey stood up slowly, squinting at the horizon. That island's not for sale. Chapter 11. Low tide, high stakes. The train bell rumbled softly as it cut through the lake, the sky painted with streaks of orange and violet. The deck was quiet, just a few passengers scattered about, watching the city skyline creep closer. Councillor Edwin Raines stood near the stern, appearing relaxed, but his grip on the rail was white-knuckled. He didn't notice McCathie slip into the cabin below deck, her sister Eloise settling calmly on a bench nearby with her knitting. Only MacNeely approached, solo, casual, one hand on the brim of his hat. Funny how the lake always settles down near sunset, Mack said, leaning beside him. Raines gave him a sideways glance. You back again? Just a chat between passengers, Mack said easily. It's been a long few days. Poor Jeanette Everly. What a waste. Raines exhaled, slow and tight. She made things difficult. Mack looked up. How so? She never knew when to stop, Raines muttered. She thought she could stand in the way of progress. She was stubborn, loud, an agitator, really. Is that what she was doing on the ferry? Mack asked. Agitating? Raines shrugged. She had her little folder of papers, threatening to go public, talk to the press, embarrass me. Sharp said he could keep her quiet, but the woman had no sense of self-preservation. Mack winced dramatically and gripped the railing. Oof. Leg's turning again. I might be sick. Please spare me, Raines said, stepping back. But Mack didn't bend over the rail. Instead, he pulled off his hat and flipped it upside down. A small microphone blinked from under the brim. Say cheese, Mack said, just as Mick reappeared behind them, arms folded. Raines spun, face drained to color. You tricked me. Tricked yourself, Mick said. We just gave you room to talk. From her bench, Sister Eloise sat down her knitting and opened her handbag, revealing a larger recorder beside her lavender lozenges. I especially liked the part where you said you had no sense of self-preservation, she said pleasantly. Rather ominous, don't you think? You can't use that, Raines barked. She's not even law enforcement. No, Mick said, but we are, and you confessed. We have it on tape. Raines blustered, then lunged as if to grab the recorder, but Mack moved faster, intercepting him with a firm hand on the shoulder. Careful, Counselor, Mack said. You're one bad move from assaulting a nun. When the ferry docked, uniformed officers were already waiting. They stepped aboard and took Raines into custody, reading him his rights as the evening light flickered across the lake. As they led him away, Raines turned back one last time. You'll regret this, he snarled. I had a vision for this city. You just forgot the people who lived in it, Mick said. Back on board, Mack sank onto a bench beside Sister Eloise with a dramatic sigh. A recording trick work with anyone else, she asked. Once with a cheating bookie, Mack said. He confessed to 3 things I didn't even ask about. She smiled faintly and offered him a lavender lozenge. Not a sandwich, Mack muttered, but I'll take it. Chapter 12. Island Justice. The headlines next morning were bold, blunt, and merciless. Counselor arrested in island death. Development scandal unravels at City Hall. Raines barely made it out of the holding cell before his lawyers started muttering about immunity deals and misunderstood intentions. But it was too late for spin. The confession, recorded by two detectives and an unimpressed retired nun, was airtight. And Harvey Pitt, grizzled and weary, walked in the prosecutor's office with a duffel bag full of guilt and a statement to peel back the entire operation. He admitted to taking hush money, admitted to helping cover up Jeanette's death. But more than that, he named names, signed papers, explained how Douglas Sharp had orchestrated the push to redevelop the islands, using fake signatures, forged permits, a handful of city officials willing to look the other way. Within days, Sharp was indicted. His redevelopment plan crumbled like a sandcastle under a storm tide. And the island was quiet again. That evening, Mick and Mack stood on the Ward's Island pier, watching the water lap of the pilings. "Think it'll stick?" Mack asked. "Or someone new will show up with blueprints and promises?" Mick shrugged. "There's always someone looking to build over something." Mack looked toward the water. "We did all right, though, huh?" "We did all right." A gull screamed overhead. A distant ferry horn groaned across the lake. The sun was low and golden, stretching the city skyline into silhouettes. The wind carried the scent of cedar, damp wood, and salt from Mack's sandwich, which he finally found at the tea house after 4 days of asking. "Harvey's got a lot to live with," Mack said. "But he did the right thing in the end." "He wasn't the only one," Mick replied. They stood in silence a while longer. They turned and walked back down the dock, shadows trailing behind them. Epilogue. Smooth sailing. Back on the Trillium Bell with the island shrinking behind them and the city twinkling ahead. Mack leaned into a bench with his coat wrapped tight, a cup of steaming tea in hand. "Next time we take a ferry," he said, "I want it to be a donut shop, not a murder." Mick gave him a sideways glance and a slow smile. "Only thing I'll promise is dry land." The ferry chugged on. The lake rippled beneath it. Behind them, the island faded into the mist, like a secret, almost forgotten. The end. Thank you for listening. This has been an Ontario Cold Cases Canada's True Crime Podcast and a Mick and Mack mystery.